Welcome to the Morning Gym, the show that explores Scripture in order to exercise and strengthen our faith in Jesus Christ. The Morning Gym is brought to you by Growing in Messiah, equipping believers to live and defend their faith. And now, here's your host, Caleb Haig.
What is up, everybody? Thank you so much for joining me. This will be pretty quick. And the reason why is because we have actually talked quite a bit about Acts 15, and I don't want to belabor the point here. In fact, there's some really good articles and one that I'll be releasing at some point on the 4 different prohibitions, what they were actually for in Acts 15. And so you can go back and watch the previous videos that I've done on this. I also did an interview with Dr. Dustin Benj, and so that's kind of what has shaped the beginning episodes of the Morning Gym. This is going to be just a really, really quick kind of back thought of mine. We talked last time on the Morning Gym about Acts 15 and whether or not it was pertaining to sanctification. And what I mean by that is, do we believe that the 4 laws that were given by the Jerusalem Council in Acts 15 were given so that the Gentiles would be sanctified through those laws? Now, one of the other things that I brought up were the Noahide Laws, and basically the idea by some like Dr. Craig Keener, who I highly respect. I disagree with him on this, but I highly respect him. One of the things that he's suggested is that the 4 prohibitions of Acts 15 pertain actually to a precursor of what is called the Noahide Laws. Well, the Noahide Laws are 7 laws that were given by the rabbis, the later rabbis, in probably maybe the 4th or 5th century CE, and they pertain to how a Gentile is justified. Now, I think that any believer in Jesus Christ who has read certainly anyone who believes in salvation by faith alone is going to agree that the Jerusalem Council certainly would not give laws that pertain directly to justification, right? Justification is by faith and not by 4 laws that were given by the Jerusalem Council. And so this is, I think, somewhat clear from Scripture. Okay, so if they're not about justification, and I mean, we could hash out and talk more about whether or not the 4 laws in Acts 15 are actually talking about the Noahide Laws, which I don't think they are. But if they're not talking about that, we talked about whether or not they're talking about sanctification. In other words, is a Gentile supposed to keep these 4 prohibitions? And those are the only 4 prohibitions that they are to keep that pertain to sanctification and how we walk with God. And my answer to that was, no, I don't believe it is. The reason why is because we see Paul talk constantly about sanctification and how a person is supposed to, different things that a person is supposed to do, and they go far beyond the 4 prohibitions that are given within Acts 15. So then the question needs to become, okay, well, what are the 4 prohibitions about? And ultimately, I was writing a blog post for Growing in Messiah, which you can find on Growing in Messiah right now. It's called, what did I call it? Anyway, I'll find the title for you here in just a second. You can find it on Growing in Messiah. It's called The Law and Covenant Membership. And so basically the question that I began to ask myself is, are we actually asking the right question? And what I mean by that is, I think there are a lot of debates that are going on within Christianity, and with the rise of things like the Torah movement. There's also the Hebrew roots movement. There's also the rise of Messianic Judaism, and all of these kind of different debates that are going on between Christianity and different sects of Christianity on what sanctification is, and then all these groups that have kind of sprung up. The question has been discussed a lot on what laws a Christian should keep. And I think that our discussion of Acts 15 may play into this just a little bit. And the reason why is because I think that the idea of what laws should I keep, or should I as a Christian, as a Gentile Christian, should I keep the law of Moses, or should I keep the Torah, or these kind of things, I think it's actually the wrong question. And I think that if we reframe our mind to look more at the Bible as a a compilation of covenant documents between God and his people, and then writings around those covenants, then I think that we might have a better ability to answer the question of commandments, sanctification, and law. N.T. Wright talks about this a bit in his book, The Day the Revolution Began, and I've actually been listening to that book in audio format. And he talks about the way that Israel in the first century, everything was centered around covenant. Everything came through a covenant lens. And then he frames how Christ coming and dying on the cross actually fits into a covenant aspect, as opposed to just the idea that of substitutionary atonement. And N.T. Wright does a much better job at talking about those things than I ever could. And so I would encourage you to read that book if that's something that you're interested in. But one of the things that actually sparked in my mind is this idea of covenant membership. Now, I've always thought of covenant membership in terms of, okay, are we covenant members or not? But I don't think I've put enough emphasis on it. What I mean by that is I think that all of the biblical covenants are in some way connected. So, for instance, the Abrahamic covenant talks about in your seed all the nations of the earth will be blessed. Okay, how is that to be done? Well, we know that it's to be done through a messianic figure, and that messianic figure is the Abrahamic covenant is connected to the Davidic covenant, because the seed in your seed all the nations of the earth will be blessed. Well, the Davidic covenant tells us what seed that is. It's actually from the line of David, and it'll be a king that will reign eternally. And so it's through this king that the Abrahamic covenant is fulfilled. So those two covenants are fulfilled, are connected together. Sorry, not fulfilled, they're connected together. Another thing that we can see is that the Abrahamic covenant actually has a land promise with it. I will give this land to you and your descendants. The Mosaic covenant is connected to the Abrahamic covenant in that and Paul talks about this in Galatians, but the land is promised to Abraham's descendants no matter what they do. It's unconditional. It's not whether or not they keep the law or not. However, each generation is held to a standard of the Mosaic covenant to retain that land. And so the Abrahamic covenant is connected in some way to the Mosaic covenant. If Israel doesn't keep the Mosaic covenant, they are exiled from that land. However, Deuteronomy tells us that if Israel is in the land of its enemies and they keep all that has been commanded in this book, then God will bring them back to the land. So the land is always promised through Abraham to the descendants. So the question that I think needs to be asked in Acts 15, and we're going to bring it back to Acts 15 now, the question that I think actually needs to be asked is, when a Gentile comes to faith in Jesus Christ, what does that do for the Gentile? Does the Gentile, and this is something that I'm going to talk about more in my blog posts and also in later episodes, but the question needs to, I think, be, what happens to the Gentile? Does the Gentile, become part of Israel? Does the Gentile become a covenant member? And I think that is a definite yes. So I think that a Gentile who attaches themselves to God, they do that through covenant. Okay. So the question that I think we need to be asking is, what covenant is the Gentile a part of? So if a Gentile comes into covenant communion with God, covenant relationship with God, how is that done, first of all? And second of all, what covenant is that Gentile a part of? Now, I think that there's a lot of answers that come very quickly to people. Many Christians are just going to automatically say, well, a Gentile is a part of the new covenant. And that may very well be. But the question then becomes, what are the stipulations of that covenant? Because within the Bible, covenants are always made, the stipulations of the covenant are always made known. And so in Jeremiah 31:31, we see a little bit of this, but it's not fully hashed out what the obligations of each party are, and whether or not it's a conditional covenant or an unconditional covenant. Now, I know many Christians are just going to instantly say it's a unconditional covenant. Okay, so these are the things that I think need to be studied a little bit more. And we've had some really good scholars who have really taken some time to study these things, like N.T. Wright, although I don't agree fully with everything that Dr. Wright says. And there's actually probably a lot that I disagree with Dr. Wright on. I'm just giving an example that we have good scholars and we have good Christian scholars who have actually done some great work in covenant. Another one would be Daniel Block. Dr. Block has done some really, really interesting and great work with the covenant and the book of Deuteronomy. And so I guess the ultimate point that I'm trying to make is when we get to Acts 15 and the Jerusalem Council is talking about what laws or what stipulations the Gentiles need to keep, the question that I would have is, first of all, are those Gentiles covenant members? If they are, what covenant are they a part of? Does the entire covenant apply to them? Are there stipulations for the covenant? And then after we've worked all that out, after we've understood that, then we can come to Acts 15 and say, okay, now what's really going on in Acts 15 and what is the Jerusalem Council actually trying to figure out? Because if the covenant is already set with the Gentiles, then they're already covenant members and those stipulations already apply to them. So therefore, the laws that are given by the Jerusalem Council have to work with and around whatever covenant the Gentiles are currently in. And therefore, I think that once again, and going back to the last Morning Gym episode that we had, I don't believe that it has to do with sanctification, because I think that sanctification is actually covenantal. So we become sanctified, we become like Christ due to the covenant that the Gentiles are in. Okay, there's a lot to think about there, and there's a lot that I've said. I hope that this video has maybe sparked. I wasn't trying to answer any questions here. I was actually trying to spark some more conversation, some more thoughts within you. So if you have any comments, you can always email me, caleb@growinginmessiah.com, or you can leave comments in the comment section of this video. And I will be back next time with another video. I hope you enjoy. Have a good day.